So if you watch my recent video, you'll know that I wasn't particularly happy with the upcoming update patch notes. While I didn't mind the idea of them implementing an anti-slugging and anti-tunneling measure, I thought that the way they were talking about implementing it could have been a bit problematic for the game. And while a lot of it isn't as bad as it sounded on paper, much more of it is actually a lot worse than I would have guessed. I said multiple times in the previous video that the one thing that we didn't have when I was looking through the patch notes was numbers and figures, which with the release of the PTB we now have. And we also have even more changes that weren't even listed in the original patch notes, which are interesting to say the least. So the point of this video is to go through the PTB this time and compare it to how the patch notes look to see just how bad these changes were. The first change that I want to go through is the removing of the loud noise notification that killers get from an unhook. I'm not going to repeat and re-establish every point that I made in the previous video in this one. If you want to check out what my original takes were reading through the patch notes, then go watch my previous video. But it's safe to say that I was very unhappy with the idea of them removing this notification because I felt like it was taking away such vital base kit information from killers. And after playing through the PTB, I can confidently say that my opinion has not changed at all. Being a more experienced killer, and by that I mean playing the game since a month after its release all the way back in 2016, I don't think this change affects my games too much. But it's just another place for your mind to be where it didn't necessarily need to be before, where you need to actually actively think about whether they have or haven't been unhooked and how that changes how you play the rest of the game. What I mean by this is that old loud noise notification would tell you two things. It would first tell you when your survivor is unhooked, and it would also tell you that another player is unhooking them. I know that seems really obvious and a really stupid thing to say, but this information actually helped so much because it told you that there were at least 2 other players out of the 4 survivors that weren't doing gens. If you had a good map knowledge of the map you were playing on as well, it would also give you a pretty good inference about what those 2 survivors are going to do next. This change that they made to the game has taken away all of this from the killer. Now if you look to the left hand side of my screen right here, you'll notice this big black stain that covers the survivor that I have just hooked. This black stain wasn't exactly what I had in mind when they were talking about anti-tunneling measures and hiding the hook states from the killer. I thought that the hook states were already hidden from the killer, so I didn't think this mattered. Now I haven't played too much of the PTB at the time I've been recording this video. It's been really hard to get games, hence why the game you're looking at in the background was a custom game against bots. But one thing I do know from the patch notes, which I will show right now, is that this black stain stays for 10 seconds after the survivor has been unhooked. Now 10 seconds doesn't seem that drastic, and I'll admit 10 seconds is not that drastic for a game. But then you scroll up a bit and you see that the unhook benefits that survivors get, the haste, the endurance and the elusive status effects last for 30 seconds after being unhooked. This is not even to mention the no collision, the revealing the killer's aura within 32 meters, and the immunity to both the AFK crows and the killer instinct, which I already expressed my concerns about in the previous video. Now one thing I will say is that the killer now obtained the ability to see the hook states the survivors were on, which does help with anti-tunneling. It takes away the possibility of you accidentally chasing the same survivor back to back after being unhooked in a trial. And while that is helpful alongside the 5% haste that you get after hooking a new survivor and the base kit barbecue that they're trying to implement, I feel like a lot of killers were doing this anyway, or at least killers that have been playing the game for a little while, where you'd kind of make a mental note of who you hooked how many times. I also don't think that it is quite balanced with the extra benefits that survivors get. And I also have the exact same opinion on having empathy for the newer killers to the game, or the people that don't play killer as much, really struggling with remembering this list of rules that they now have. Now, I have only played one game of actual live Dead by Daylight against other players because the queue times have just been absolutely horrendous. And one thing that I do think does need to be taken into account and thought about, which I can't comment on because I haven't experienced this myself yet, is survivors trying to abuse this feature of the anti-tunneling system. And by abuse it, I mean a survivor taking advantage of the fact that if a killer kills a survivor before 6 hook states are completed, then the survivors will get a gen repair speed bonus. Or the other change where if a survivor dies after being the last survivor that was hooked, then gens can't regress or get blocked. I listed a few ways that a survivor could actually take advantage of this in my previous video, so again, refer back to that one if you want to know more. But I have yet to experience this, so I don't think that I'm too qualified to comment on it at the moment, but please let me know in the comments if this has actually happened to you yet. Moving on to the anti-slugging measures, I don't actually think that there's much to talk about, because these are definitely not as bad as they actually sounded on paper, but I never thought that the anti-slugging was the big problem of this update. I definitely thought that the anti-tunneling system was going to cause more issues, and the anti-slugging anti-slugging system was only going to really cause the issue of people not wanting to bring anti-slug perks anymore, or anti-slug perks not even existing anymore because they weren't needed, and that then freeing up that perk slot for something else. So on the whole, there is not actually that much for me to say about the anti-slugging measure because I do not think that it is as drastic at all. Now the last thing that I want to talk about is some of the perk changes that they made and the perk reworks that they did on both the killer and the survivor side. The first survivor perk that I wanted to talk about was Vigil, which change now means that survivors can only benefit from one Vigil effect at a time. I believe this is good. I didn't have this happen to me too much, the problem of people running multiple Vigils and then getting infinite sprint bursts or anything like that. But after the killer changes and the killer perk changes, which we'll get into in a moment, I'll take anything I can get. I think this is a good change overall. The next perk change I wanted to talk about was Hope. Now this personally annoys me because I love running Hope on Survivor. Dipping it from 7% to 5% seemed unnecessary for me because I thought the Hope was balanced enough in the state it was in. Hope was a perk that rewarded you for doing the main objective of the game, and I don't think that the 7% haste boost was too much because the killer could still catch up to you. It just gave you that extra bit of help in a dire situation. To be honest, I'll still probably end up running Hope. I still think the 5% haste will be good enough. I just think that this change was maybe a bit unnecessary. Now moving on to the killer perks, the first one that I want to talk about is Ruin because I just find it funny that they buffed it back up to 150%, especially considering the perks that we're about to get into that got nerfed. I think the fact that they buffed a regression perk is very funny to me. Right, now coming in for the big one, you all knew this was coming, Pain Res. Pain Res at its max tier has been nerfed down to 12% from 20. Now at the end of my last video I said that the developers were starting to feed into the gen rushing meta and take away the counters from the killer, and if this doesn't prove my point, I don't know what does. Now I believe that Pain Res was one of, if not the strongest killer perks in the game, so am I mad about it getting a nerf? No, because I'm always up for behaviour, trying to balance out the game between killer and survivor. But if you're going to try and balance something out between killers and survivors, or try and do this meta shake up, why would you do it when gen rushing is going to be the strongest it has been in the history of the game? Now while this may be more tailored to newer players or players that don't play as much killer, now that gen regression and gen blocking perks have already become a great big risk to bring to those killers, because if you sacrifice a survivor that was hooked previously, your regression and blocking perks will not even work anymore. Not to mention that perk slot I was talking about previously from the anti-slugging feature has now been freed up for them to potentially bring a gen rushing perk. It doesn't seem right that they have decided to implement this nerf now, at least not without any detriment to the survivors as well. I'm going to group this in with the DMS nerf, which has now been changed to block the gen from 50 seconds to 35 seconds. Which on the whole, I still don't think is too bad, because the whole point of DMS was that you mainly used it when you were about to chase a survivor off a gen, and even if you used it in Pain Res DMS, like I was testing out in the gameplay behind me, it still blocks the gen for a considerable amount of time, so I don't think this is terrible. But I still think that this change is questionable to do at a time when gen rushing is going to be more prominent than ever. Another perk I'm throwing in here to talk about is Barbecue, because I think it's actually laughable that since Barbecue has now kind of become base kit, how bad it has gotten now. Like, this rework is just ridiculous. This perk is nowhere near as good as it was. But those are all the changes that I'm going to be talking about now, because I do want to make more videos on the PTB about the new killer and about the Myers change, but I didn't want to be constantly dropping in these little things about these changes. I would have rather gotten them all out the way in one video right at the start. But to summarise, is the PTB as bad as it sounded in the patch notes? In some ways yes, and in some ways no. As a killer main that does also play a lot of Survivor, I am glad that they have added an anti-tunneling and anti-slugging feature into this game. I do think that something like this was needed. But on the whole, my opinions from the first video haven't really changed following this PTB. If anything, some of them have actually probably gotten stronger. I do think this PTB though will have a lot more diverse opinions now, because I don't think it has worked exactly how people thought it was going to. But I still do really dislike a lot of these changes, and I think they could have been implemented in a bit of a better way. Just to throw it in at the end here, I am going to be doing a video about this new killer. You can see the gameplay that I got today from this custom game against bots playing in the background. I'm just saying that because I don't want it to be perceived as this is the only video that I'm going to put out that includes the new killer. I am going to do an entire video dedicated to the new killer because I really do enjoy playing as them. I also am going to do a video solely on the Myers rework, which I will also record at some point soon. The reason that I didn't put both of those or one of those into this video is because I feel like both of those deserve their own video. The sole purpose of this video was to compare how I felt about the PTB's patch notes versus the actual PTB. I just wanted to get this out of the way before I started focusing on the other parts of the PTB while this was still fresh in my mind. So please do stick around to see those two videos. I do have whole videos planned on both of them, as I said, and I am really looking forward to recording them. I'm not sure when they will be out, but I'm going to make sure that they do come out very soon. But I am going to end this video here. I do hope you enjoyed, and I hope you enjoyed watching this very cool Mori from the new killer as we fade to black, and I hope to see you again soon.